We are back with Season 7, Episode 6, Deal, No Deal. This is the episode where they become drug dealers? Excuse me, spice dealers. Spice runners, which... Okay. I don't want to get into this too much. Yeah, I know spice is actually in many ways worse than regular drugs, but yeah, it's this is problematic, is the nicest way I can say that. Like, this is one of those interesting things when it comes to fiction, is you have to consider some real-world implications when it comes to writing your fiction. You have to. You can't just look at it from the fictional perspective. It's just too easy for things to be taken in the wrong way. There's a trope called unfortunate implications, which applies here. But sometimes, and I've seen this happen, sometimes writers do this because they just didn't think about it. They didn't think about what they're saying actually means. I'll actually give you a specific example. Give me one moment. It's an episode of Star Trek Voyager, which is fresh in my mind because I just covered it about a week ago, which was written by Lisa Klink. Now, she's not a terrible writer, and she's done some good stuff over her time. She gave us Revulsion. She gave us Warlord. She also gave us Message in a Bottle. Some good episodes, right? But she also gave us Blood Fever. And for those of you who've never watched Voyager, the main plot of Blood Fever, I want to stress that this is not hyperbole or exaggeration, culminates in a scene where a guy tries to beat a woman into unconsciousness so he can have sex with her. Now, this is treated as drama, but I don't think she thought about that for 5 seconds. I don't think she really did that on purpose. You know what I mean? The writer, I mean, Lisa Klink. Anyways, moving on. So, the quote at the beginning of the episode, mistakes are valuable lessons often learned too late. Is it just me or the quote's not as good as they were in the previous 4? I'm sorry to keep comparing this to the previous 4, but, I mean, I just watched those episodes today, right? It's a little fresh in my mind. And those first 4 episodes were legit. Like, I was into it, right? Like, you could tell, right? Like, surely it's obvious how much I was into it. How much I was just like, yeah, oh man, and then this, and then this, and then this, and now it's like, yeah, okay. Yeah, so, a couple little details, not a lot of big stuff, a couple little details to comment on. I do notice, I was looking at some of the shots which they show in this episode, where they actually show footage from Season 5, and, of course, the footage here. And, God, obviously, there's better texture mapping. I know I'm using the wrong terminology, but, like, not the texture itself, but the thing that reflects light on the texture. I forget what that's called. And the lighting in general is better designed, and the meshes have more polygons, which I know is not an accurate way to describe it, but the point is, it's smooth curves are more smooth and straight curves are more straight. It's really well done. There's just the visuals in general are so noticeably better, even from Season 5 to Season 7. I just wanted to give another direct thing about that. Yeah, the greatest teacher failure is. That's a good quote. It reminds me of another quote. You know the difference between someone who's successful at what it is you're interested in and you? That person has failed a lot more than you have. Anyways. So, she went to one of the best academies, Skywalker Academy. And yeah, that tracks. Anakin was a hell of a tinkerer. One of his various... He had the weirdest set of traits. You ever think about that? Like, you ever think about the D&D character sheet of Anakin Skywalker? Okay, what do you have maxed? All right, tinkering, piloting, and beating the crap out of anything that's in my way. He was an awesome engineer. It's one of the 3 traits he is most well known for, at least from a stats perspective. Anyways, yeah, anyways, I'm getting off topic. So, some good animation. Ahsoka is like, oh, thank God she buys the lie. Trace mentions that there's no academies down here. I find myself wondering about that, because that could just be some kind of random throwaway comment. But if there's legitimately no academies down there, are there any schools at all in Coruscant and the Undercity? Because if there's not, I hate to get all world-buildy here, but how do they propel knowledge forwards? There's an insane amount of infrastructure, plumbing, and electrical engineering that is required to keep the Undercity running. So where's that knowledge coming from? Because over time, like, that's going to get lost unless it's taught. You can only carry so much forward through vocal transmission, and not everyone's going to apprentice someone who they can then teach their craft. This is all just the world builder in me wondering. Like, again, I feel like her statement is more vague than literal, right? It does make me wonder. Speaking of the world builder in me, I love the fact that there is such a thing as a military lane. Very, very brief comment on there, which was a nice little tidbit. You know, there's the military. Why are you flying into the military lane? And that's when I realized that I didn't like this episode. Oh, hear me out. Hear me out. Because as she was drifting to the military lane, I'm going to try to explain this. I'm going to fail at this. As she was drifting into that lane, the scene was so confusing in how it was presented, written, and executed that I legitimately lost track of what was happening for a second as I was typing down my notes. Because I got my notes like right here, and I got the episode right here. And I paused for a second. I was trying to process what the hell was happening. Because it's such a weirdly executed, badly executed scene. It took me a moment to realize that what was supposed to be showcased was that Trace is a terrible pilot. Now, I'm kind of with that in theory, and the episode does a better job of that immediately afterwards. The moment they hit hyperspace, and I'm like, yeah, no, she had the air brakes on, and she's never been to hyperspace before, and yada yada. But the weird thing, she just drives into an obviously, overtly military lane, going to an acclimator, which even if you don't know the class of ship, I know I'm a geek, I know I'm a ship geek, even if you don't know, that's clearly a warship, right? And it's just, huh? And then they just keep going, and they keep going, and they keep going, and the whole scene just keeps stumbling forwards in ways that it probably shouldn't have. And then I realized that the whole reason they have this whole sequence is member berries. And I am going to call it member berries, because for me, this was too much. Too many of the lines from Yularen and from Anakin and the whole sequence are just way too close to direct references to the original trilogy. Right down to the fact that Anakin actually was like, let me go ahead and sense this. Nah, it's Ahsoka. Let them pass, right? Like, that was a bit much for me. And it doesn't help that the whole scene leading up to it was like, huh? And the scene after it was like, huh? But that's why I say this, because, yeah, there's really... Anakin senses Darth Boulder. A presence I've not felt since... Oh, God! And so this whole time I'm sitting here confused. As the episode was playing, I was confused. It took me until several scenes after this that I finished processing, and realized it's just bad writing. There's something I talk about often. It's called story sequencing. It's how events connect to each other. It's that wonderful and critical connective tissue between scenes. You can always tell when story sequencing is bad in a story, whether it's a non-interactive thing like a show or a movie or a book, or an interactive thing like a game. When there's a scene, and they don't really gel, so there's just kind of a... And then we get to the next scene. And that's how several sequences felt here. There's a lot of weird, huh? And then we move on to the next scene. And this is a good example of that. We have the establishing scene of Rafa, who's very, very, protective of Trace. There's this wonderful line she has. I actually wrote it down here. Everyone plays an angle. I don't mind, except when it involves Trace. That's a good line, actually. That's some characterization right there. And that showcases a lot of her angle and a lot of her mentality. Okay, I'm with that. And then we have... And then we get on to the next scene. And you see my overall point here. Yeah, exactly. They could have just gone into hyperspace. They could have literally skipped the entire military line scene and would have shifted nothing. And yet, I forget who said it in chat. Blade Travell just said this. Trace is a terrible pilot. That's the point being made. It also helps to emphasize why Rafa kept her out of it. Not as it was originally assumed. This is actually kind of clever. Rafa, the way it's showcased is the idea that Rafa wanted to keep her out of it, specifically to protect her sister. But no, she trusts her sister. She wanted her sister on this job, but Trace is a terrible pilot. And they could have established that better in multiple directions, and indeed did establish it better, and all they had to do was that one line. You've never flown before? Well, I've speeders. How many of you are familiar with how complex it is to fly a plane in real life? How many of you are familiar with how complex it is to drive a car? What's the gap between these two skill sets? Yeah, I've actually been in cockpits. Built military cockpits, even. Because, what? You know, fair bionic bug, I'll give you that. So, yeah, no, that's actually a pretty good thing to demonstrate. And it helps to emphasize how out of her depth she is. Ironically, one of my only big complaints about Trace being a bad pilot is she's too good of a pilot the rest of the episode. No, seriously, when she came in, and there's that establishing shot as they're coming into land of, like, the nice palatial-looking thing, my first thought is, oh god, she's going to crash right into it. Or she's going to get very close to crashing right into it, or something, right? But no, perfect landing. So they establish something, and then they don't pay it off. So this is even weirder than it already is, because that's 2.5 scenes dedicated to fake drama and Trace not being good at piloting, which then never pays off. And do you see what I mean by how I say that this episode just kind of... Huh? Okay, moving on. This is a good time to mention the voice direction in this episode is not very good. Pause. So, when I was doing the theater projects and the rewrite projects, I had to give very, very specific direction to my actors. You know why? Because my actors were not in the same room with each other, acting off of each other. That means they had to know the intonation and intent of the line that was said immediately before them, right? Now, I'm a freaking good director, and I'd like to think I succeeded at that more than once, but obviously even I failed at this task many times, because my actors were all over the place, right? Across the whole world. I had actors in Australia, I had actors in frickin' Israel. I had actors all over the place, and I had to get them coordinated and give them the direction they need to say their lines in a way that worked, right? In a way that matched what was said before and what is said after. That's hard to do. I'm not trying to dismiss it. Just like with, oh god, what's his frickin' name? The guy who defended Starfield. Just like his comments about how it's hard to make video games. Yeah. But, you know, that doesn't mean you just get a pass for failing at it. Which brings me to the voice direction, because the voice direction was just off in this episode. Like, there's two broad ways you can do an argument scene, for example, when it comes to voice direction. One is where people get ugly. Arcane did this, if you remember, where they don't really raise their tone, but instead there's that very particular tone. You know the one. I bet a lot of you right now, you know what it is, because there's this thing where there's almost like a reflex, a mental, emotional reflex when you hear that tone. Yeah, it's very hostile. It's a good word. It's very hostile. That's one way you can direct that kind of an argument. But obviously they don't want these people to actively hate each other, so the usual other way they could go with this is something more like yelling. Because, and you're probably, not literal yelling, you never want to yell into your mic. But what I mean by that is they raise their voices because there's this thing that's going on in their brain where they're thinking, why aren't you listening to me? And without even meaning it, and human psychology is fascinating about this, without even meaning to it, most people think in the middle of a discussion, a debate, if you're not listening to me, then I need to raise my voice because you're not listening to me. Why aren't you listening to me? And that's how you can direct an argument. They do neither of these two things. These people are just having a conversation. The dialogue and the voices literally do not match. It's weird. And you'll notice I've said that about three separate things now. The design of this episode is off. It's not at the level of Starfield. Nothing's at the level of Starfield. Seriously, I'm not sure I've seen worse voice acting than Starfield. Oh my god. I should mention, I have a mentality when I'm taking notes for these. I did this for the Ruminations, I did this for the Mini-Nations, I did this for the Streaminations. And each time I'm sitting there... I mean, Mega Man X7 has pretty bad voice acting. And there's a mentality that goes into it. I'm explaining this wrong, of course. But from my perspective, I notice when I have nothing to say because I'm trying to come up with something to write down. And if I ever, that's Mega Man 8, if I ever reach a point where I don't have anything to write down, but I don't want to lose track of the episode, I just start in my notes summarizing events rather than actually discussing them. Like, because there's nothing to talk about. And I noticed myself doing that a lot in this episode. In fact, you've probably noticed that we're like 2 minutes into the episode so far in terms of discussion points, and we haven't really discussed any of the actual meat of the plot or the characters at all. So yeah, Kessel's a planet now, with lots of greenery. I'm actually okay with that, as weird as that sounds. It's a retcon, of course. But I do find the whole thing interesting because of something I'll get to in a second. So let me come back to that. So the first thing they find out is they're going to Kessel to pick up medicine. And obviously that's more there for the viewers who are like, oh my god. But I do like how Ahsoka made it is like, I'm sorry, what? Also, is this the first time, I suppose, excuse me, the second time we've ever actually seen Kessel? On camera, I mean. Obviously Kessel was in the books, but I mean, like, you know, media, right? I'm not sure of the exactitude on that, because I know Rebels showed Kessel and I know Solo showed Kessel, so I'm not sure of the exact timeline here. But either way, it puts us up to a grand total of 3, and the other 2 didn't show off the rest of Kessel. And yet you'd think these 2 people who at least have enough of an opinion on Jedi could know what the spice trade is, and how terrifyingly dangerous the spice trade is. But no, instead we're going to go and do spice trading with known gangsters. Okay, cool. I do love the visuals and architecture. I am not smart enough to be capable of telling what they based the building off of King... I don't even remember his freaking name. Yeah, it's a freaking Twi'lek. I love that. But I find myself wondering, because they did some really good job with it. Honestly, they probably just copy pasted, like they probably did one of those 3D. I can't remember what it's called. It's where like you like take a 3D scan of something and some pictures, and then you kind of dump it in. Moorish. I could see that. I could see that. Either way, it looked good. I'm with it. Cool, cool, cool. Everything's cool. Everything's cool. And then they go, and it turns out that there's a king who wants to transport unrefined spice. No, actually, Kessel was a moon back in the EU. Or, okay, the EU wasn't exactly consistent, but it was usually presented as a moon, is a better way to put that. So, yeah, Jaludo, this is... I'm confused by all of this. I mean, as I talked about literally yesterday... That's fair, Rax. As I talked about literally yesterday, there's... Just because a writer has done bad things doesn't mean they can't do good things, and vice versa. We have a tendency to think that someone who puts out good quality will always put out good quality, and that's understandable, but history just doesn't prove that true, right? I was bringing this up with regards to Goldie Hawn, who I can't stand as a writer, but has also put out some good writings over her career, including, ironically, Star Wars. So, in fact, actually, someone do me a favor. Has she written anything for any of the shows we're going to cover? Because that would amuse me tremendously. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. So, Kessel, the idea I kind of... Yeah, Drew Karpyshyn's another great example of this. I kind of like the idea of Kessel being this... So, hang on. I don't want to screw up her name because I keep screwing up her name, and I'm not doing it on purpose. Christy Golden is her name. Christy Golden. Oh, yeah, hang on. Real quick. All right. I know she drifted over to Star Wars for something. That's why I bring it up. So I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Retcons are not inherently bad. If you change something or even slightly change something, I don't mind. What depends is what you do with it, right? And how often you do it. So the idea of Kessel being this beatific, wonderful, like green, wonderful, bountiful planet, I'm kind of with, especially since they then get up, head over here, and then descend down into the hell sulfur pits of hell. There's even a line about, I forget what she says, but she says the most on-the-nose line possible, which is something like, someone's always got to pay a cost for their prosperity, or something like that. And I'm with all this, except the episode is so deliberately, horrifyingly overt about it that I'm just like... I will admit there's a powerful scene here. There's this bit where Trace is looking down at the worker crew with what I can only refer to as, like, wonder. Like, oh my god, they've got to make so much money to afford all those thousands of droids. And Ahsoka's expression as she's saying that slowly descends into disgust. And then she says, those aren't droids, those are people. I like this for two reasons. First of all, obvious. But second of all, Ahsoka doesn't consider droids people. Anyways. Just point it out. Are who, Rex? I mean, clearly. Ahsoka hated C-3PO. Why is slavery so cheap in Star Wars? This is actually something that I've brought up, God, almost every single time that I've covered Star Wars. For some reason, Star Wars has this thing where they constantly insist that this jar of piss is actually peach tea. I'm sorry, I have no better way to put that. Because... oh god, Chill Penguin's gonna kill me now, I'm ready. Because Star Wars consistently, across, like, pretty much the entirety of Star Wars' history, has slavery that is wide-scale, widespread, and it's always portrayed as cheaper than the alternative. And I roll to disbelieve. Because history and economics and a better understanding of world building is the only possible answer I could give to that. Okay, what? I thought... what? I thought you were doing... You kept talking about building up to something, Chill Pangolin. I thought you were building up to the bits thing. Like Frieza was. Hang on. So that's Lesbian Animal Adventure, Celeste, and Sid Meier's Pirates. I think I'm wrong about that last one. I was right. Holy crap. Okay, so let me finish the streamination. Let me put a pin in that. I can't process that right now. I'm sorry. Because I don't believe it. I'm sorry. I do not believe in a society and setting as interconnected and as in-depth and as gargantuan as Star Wars, that slavery is not only widespread but cheaper. There's too much going against that, right? Now, I'm going to let it go because it's one of those things, right? Star Wars has insisted for decades. And that's a thing, and I'm just going to let it go. But I had to comment on it because the biggest problem here, and this is the problem, is it's always used as a shorthand. It's not a world building point. It's not a setting building point. It's not an economic point. It's not an anything point. It's there to establish that they're the bad guys. The only reason that those are people down there, the only reason that those are individuals who are doing the work is because that makes the Kessel people they're working for more evil. And that's it. That's all they do for that, right? Anyways, like I don't want to go too much down this particular rabbit hole for an episode that frankly doesn't deserve it. But it struck me for the 5,000th time as like, oh, okay, yep, they're evil. Got it. And the worst part is the people they're running the spice for are obviously horrifically evil, and they make a point of it, and they call attention to it, and they show it up close, and then they immediately forget about it because the only thing they care about is that the people they're delivering the spice to are evil. They don't care about the horrible conditions of the working class slaves. They just are immediately focused on the Pikes. Why did you introduce that plot point if you're going to immediately abandon it? And do you see why this episode is so weird? It's so weird. Yeah, they don't care what spice does to people. They don't care about the people whose lives are being destroyed harvesting it. They don't care about the potential long-scale ramifications of this thing. There is one line I liked in this whole sequence. Where is it? Rafa says it. She says, a slave operation... They can't be slaves. A slave operation this large? The Republic wouldn't stand for it. I liked that line. I did actually like that line. Credit where credit is due. But then there's the rest of it. So, interesting thing. I don't actually know if this is true in the AU, which I believe at this point we are firmly in the AU. Because I know Clone Wars is one of those weird shows that actually bridges the gap between the EU and the AU. But, okay, so we are officially AU. I don't know if this is true, but in the EU, in some works of the EU, spice could actually be refined into medicine. That was a true statement. And the who, Rax? And I find myself wondering, because while this was happening, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, this is an interesting thing, right? Like, this is something that could have some validity. Because there's an intergalactic war going on right now. And, oh, Jesus Christ. Rax, could you please? There's an intergalactic war, thank you, Rex, going on right now. And selling medicine to both sides, actually, yeah, I could buy that. It would almost be fascinating, interesting, and a wonderful talking point to have the drug lords who make money off of slaves selling medicine to the military and adding a bit of layer of gray and interesting, and again, make it a talking point, right? Ahsoka can't exactly have the universal high ground here if this medicine is going to people who are actively trying to save lives, who are actively trying to stop further damages for the course of the Clone Wars. All of that's thrown out the window, of course, because they're actually delivering this to the fricking Pikes, who, if you remember, have already established part of now. I'm pretty sure it was in the Clone Wars. Might have been in Rebels. I actually don't remember. But we've seen the Pikes before. So they're gangsters. Okay. So all that's thrown out the window. But it was the beginnings of something interesting. And it's gone. But the other thing, yeah, the Pikes are nasty. But the other thing that struck me, nobody in the episode brings this up, by the way. It doesn't matter if it's going to medicine or gangsters, because they're transiting spice. Unrefined spice, they specifically say. Now, this is a bad analogy, but if you send out a ship filled with gold to go somewhere, I actually do like the Pikes here. If you send out a ship filled with gold, it doesn't really matter if it's being used to make circuitry or not. It's still a ship full of gold, right? Again, not a great analogy, but you get the overall point here. It's still contraband, it's still dangerous, and it's still fungible. And I'm sorry, I know some people don't know what that means. It means it is a resource that can be traded as if it was a currency. It has immediate tangible value, right? So that's still terrifyingly dangerous, regardless of if it was going to medicine, which of course it isn't. No, nobody gives a crap about the medicine thing. Nobody gives a crap about the slaves. Nobody gives a crap about transiting spice. You know, the only thing anybody cares about is the pikes. Who wrote this dreck? Like, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit angry, but it's like getting this close to being something really cool, and then it flops. And then it tries. So the pikes. I should also mention, I haven't liked Trace all that much. Why did she dump the spice? Like, I'm sorry. I really want to know. Real question. And for those of you on YouTube, same question. Is it just me, or is this the scene where I officially started not liking her as a character? Where I drifted from not like into active dislike of Trace as a character? Like, this pushed her down for me. I get it. She's in way over her head, and she's freaking out a little bit, but, like, not very well acted, not very well written, not very well showcased. Nothing was doing anything necessary to make this scene work. You remember Powder? No spoilers. That's how you make this plot point happen and make it work. That's how you do it. That's how you make it work. This does not work. Then, somehow I still have things to complain about in this episode. Because somehow the next thing that happens is they go to hang on, actually, real quick aside, real quick. They never clarified this point, and maybe I'm just the idiot here, but they never clarify. Is this a deal between the King of Kessel and the Pikes for the spice, or is this a deal between Rafa and the Pikes for the spice? And if you're not understanding the significance, the idea here is either she's just the transit between the two, and this is a deal between these two, or she accepts a deal with the king to, unknown party B, and then she takes the spice to the Pikes instead, which is the vibe I was getting, that it was originally going to go up here, and instead it went over to the Pikes. But they never clarified. And this is important because they just dumped the spice. It's also important because if they did take it to the Pikes, and that was not the original intended recipient, now she's in trouble with the king no matter what. Now, I am an idiot, but if I might be so bold, I do think this is at least in part a failure of the episode, because the episode spends a lot of time spinning its wheels trying to accumulate drama and failing at it, and doesn't really spend enough time actually examining and developing its own plot points. Like, I'm sorry, why did the Major Domo just not flat out say, you're going to be delivering the spice to the Pikes as agreed? Why is this an issue? Why is this being brought up now? There's no reason for him to be cagey in that scene in universe. The only reason for that is so it's a reveal for us, the audience. Right? He should have slammed the hammer down. You said you were perfectly good in dealing with this. You are still our broker with the Pikes, correct? That should have just been bam. Yeah, it's confused, just like so much of the episode is. So, they go to the Pikes, and then they go to meet with the Pikes with no spice because Ahsoka has a plan. And of all the things in this episode, I'm gonna go ahead and admit that this is probably a very Anakin-style plan here. Yeah, no, exactly, Rax. We're going to deliver this to the Pikes for the view. This is clearly an episode written for people who've watched Clone Wars, who are familiar with the greater body of Star Wars. We know what spice is. We know what Kessel is. We know who the Pikes are. You could still reveal this to us in a way that makes sense to them. Ahsoka's dick is just so big. You know what I mean? No. All right, so first of all the dialogue, and I do mean all the dialogue, we need a complete overhaul act. Like at least a couple of editing passes. Let's start with that. So the big plan is they go land on the planet, and Jedi mind trick him into giving them the credits so they can leave. Question. Why everything, first of all? This is a terrible plan. But why, when they delivered the spice, did they not just get the hell out of Dodge as quickly as possible? They've really took their time with that. Second of all, why did they take the credits too? I know that sounds strange, but why exactly did they decide to get paid for a job they didn't do? Why was that part of the plan? That feels like a weird choice, and is almost assuredly just going to piss them off more. Like, what was the end game here? Okay, we've got the credits, we're out, and now we've successfully pissed off the King of Kessel and the Pikes. We've robbed them of spice and profit, and we've robbed them of money. Win? Oh, also, dun dun dun! At the end. You know something I noticed? I hate to talk about structure some more. Episode 1 of the first arc, of the Echo arc, of the Bad Batch arc, ended on a successful mission completed and a bit of a pause moment in the overall pacing of the quad, right? Episode 2 ended on the successful battle... having successfully infiltrated and found Echo. Episode 3 ended on the battle having been successfully won, peace made with the villagers, and peacing out, and Episode 4 was obviously the big conclusion. If you're paying attention, each of those episodes ended in a way that still naturally flowed into the next episode, but was itself a conclusory point. The episode concluded. There was... arcs had finished. Lines had finished. Character beats had finished. Right? This arc, yeah, it feels so much less focused in how each episode keeps concluding. Remember the end of episode 1 of this arc? It was that shot of the tap calf. And them just roaming around. By the way, did that really come from Star Wars? That's so funny. I've been using that word for years. Like decades, I think, actually. Anyways. So, they just, maybe I'll stick around for a bit. Duh! Okay. And then this episode ends with a literal dun-dun-dun. We're caught. Dun-dun-dun. I legitimately think green is the ceiling here. What do you all think? Because this is bad. And it's even more aggravating than it otherwise would be. Because it comes so close to being so many things I'm interested in. So many character points and so many setting points and so many plot points that would have worked. And Turbo don't. I could see green. There's enough gameplay. Aha! See, that's what I thought it was, Chill Pangolin. J'accuse. You tricked me. I could also see blue here. This episode actively aggravates me. And is just... It's a failure state. It's confusing. It's badly structured. It's badly voice acted. It's badly written. It's also the only episode of the 7? No. 5, excuse me. 6 that we've covered so far that I've actually felt was dragging. I think I am going to agree with the crowd and give it a green. It's a pretty low green, I think. It is, but I think we'll go ahead and acquiesce to a green on that one. Because yeah, there were small saving graces. There were some good visual designs. I mean, it's Star Wars. How many Star Wars things have bad visual design? And there were a couple of individual lines which actually worked for me. Did you notice the little tidbit during the banquet where it's like, I will hold a banquet in your honor, and every person has access to one fruit? I'm not even sure they did that on purpose, but it feels like they did. I'm sorry, the what act? Execute act immediately. Anyways, I am going to go ahead and chop off the local recording.